Welcome everyone to today's Scaling with People podcast. I'm Guinevere Curry, founder and CEO of Guide to HR. Today we're going to be talking about challenges that founders have during different series and getting into the CEO spot, as well as high performance culture. So today I have Beth Nevins on the call to talk about this. Welcome, Beth.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Shall I quickly introduce myself?
Yes, please.
Awesome. So yes, my name's Beth. I am based in London in the UK. So hello, everybody across the world. And I actually have a people and talent consultancy myself called Developer with an A, developer.io. And we specialize helping founders. I've got a long track record in startups myself, specifically around technology-oriented businesses. And we help startups from seed to Series C is generally our sweet spot across three areas. One is retained search. Two is on people, projects, and design that often comes with scaling challenges. And three, we do a specific program for mentoring and coaching first-time founders from a Series A to Series B, or what you may call a few million in ARR, upwards of that if you're bootstrapped and lucky enough to get that growth on your own. And we also do leadership training as well. And that's me.
But such a needed service inside of the startup space for sure. So let's talk about, for the founders that are listening, who may be bootstrap, who may be pre-seed or seed, thinking about Series A to Series B, or even those that are beyond that too. What are some of the challenges that you see founders have been dealing with that, like, if they have someone from a people operations perspective helping them through it, what are you seeing in today's landscape?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of things. There are lots of things that are pretty more playbook cookie cutter that happen. And then there's also a few things that are new in post-COVID landscape, which we can sort of go into. So I suppose in the obvious playbook, when you're pre sort of 1.5 or whatever ARR in the millions, so whether that's, VC backed or however, often the challenge originally is building a world-class founding team. So you're mostly focused on founder-led recruitment and articulating what your proposition and USP is, just as if you were pitching that to an investor. So that's the first sort of area of set of skills that you really need to hone in on. And then as soon as you start, obviously, having traction and moving beyond that through different rounds, the next set of challenges you start having are much more sort of people and team centered and oriented. And why is that? That's because you're moving from one team into multiple teams and what's called functional creation. And that will be the first time a founder then is hiring a leadership team and starting to work more on the business than in the business. And that's a different set of skills and mindset shift that needs to happen, just like perhaps an individual contributor might go through a certain mindset shift to become a people leader. So it's that sort of mindset shift plus operational skills that they overnight also start having to level up and acquiring. And as you then start naturally looking at scale, it's the wider sort of commercial longer term vision actually starting baking in and planning for, rather than the sort of quick iteration flywheel loop that you might have and enjoy earlier on. You're actually having to plan much further out then in terms of how you want to look at really pushing that extended market share grab as you grow on a longer term scale, and you become a lot more data informed with that strategy as you go. So you may have more complexities as you go at that point around globalization and how do we actually start entering different markets. And that's a different set of skills also culturally and through hiring that you need to think about together. In terms of the landscape though, and the changes in a post-COVID world, I mean, what are the challenges founders now are having to think about a lot earlier is, what is their working strategy, remote versus in office, as the debate continues in terms of what that position needs to be. And you have to be a bit more intentional with that earlier on than organic, because it leads to a world of pain then if you switch that strategy one way or the other as you grow. And I've seen that obviously happen. We're also having to think, we're not in a grow at all cost era. So we're being much more thoughtful. I see founders needing to double down on performance. And, we used to hate the word lean and process, but actually these two things are key enablers to sustainable growth and routes to profitability. So being more sensitive to those numbers earlier on and ensuring that there is just traction and not just this high never ending burn rate, although tech companies are often high burn businesses, but it's the balance of all of that. So there are two types of things, and I think we're in an age where, and I read this on LinkedIn, and I also support this, that we're probably seeing the better founders, or the best founders we'll see now over this post-COVID era, because of this new shift of expectation, where they'll be more sensitive to the numbers and become far more operational earlier on, and that's no bad thing in terms of that skill set, and two, in addition to be amazing visionaries. So I think we're seeing that type of shift, and how can the people leader fit in to help level up and be that operational sparring partner? I think they play a very great business partner in role to a founder now, as opposed to being someone that is doing policy or more administrative stuff and being told what to do. I think now more than ever, to level up that founder, they really need to be investing in those people leadership positions that can really accelerate their learning and development on that path.
Absolutely. And I just want to go back to something you said a bit ago, which was that as a founder, eventually get to that point where you are having to work on the business and not in the business. And that resonated so much for me as a founder myself, but also with all the CEOs and founders I work with. And that is a very big mindset change of making sure you're bringing in the right people that have the same vision, and not going to say the same mindset, because a different mindset could help actually be more creative, but definitely like understands your vision, understands your goal, wants the same thing, and is aligned from that perspective, so that then you can start letting go, letting that person own why you brought them into the organization as a whole, and start actually working on the business. I just that was so key. I wanted to call that out. And so,
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. As founders start to work on, growing their business and getting into potentially a series evaluation, whatever it might be, I think you hit it on the nail in regards to post-COVID. We have to be more scrappy. You have to focus on the financials. You have to get more sweat equity out of people. You have less like, hey, we can just go and hire 20 billion people because it's pennies on the dollar financially. That world is gone. Maybe we'll get back to it at some point, but at this moment, it's not here. And I think you're right. It does create a place where founders who can really focus on the operational aspect of the business and the people side. How do you actually engage and get the most out of people without killing them, of course, right? I don't want that to be the case, but that high performance. And so let's talk about that, because I talked to a lot of founders, and that's what they're trying to focus on, is getting to the place where their culture is about high performance. And you have 5 people, and you can't afford to bring on 2 more. How do you get those 5 people to act like 7 and produce like 7 and have that high performance culture, at the same time not burning those people out, but like upskilling them, empowering them, and then letting them really own it, right?
Yeah, completely agree. I was going to write about this, but I've been in many startups now, and I've asked all different types of roles that you may expect could answer this, but don't necessarily. And I've gone in, and we all use the word high performance, right? High performance did a little. I've even been to amazing book launches that are even telling us about top performance and high performance. And I'll be honest, like the question I raise then is, okay, but what is the definition of high performance here? And then it's like the hay bales are rolling. There's complete silence. and I think this is where fundamentally we've got this issue. So I think, let's think of the practical steps in the systems design, or how we think about this. And this is thinking, zooming right out on high level, and then we can get a bit more granular. But first of all, we need to define what it is. What is it? Then we look at who do we hire that fits in with that definition. Then we need to think about how we cultivate that high performance culture. And then we have to think about how we measure it. And that's the hardest part of all. But we end up often measuring, we end up having lots of measurement, not really understanding what we're actually measuring. And that's the big issue that we see in a lot of, I think that's how to put this delicately. I think this is the one thing in best practice toolkit in HR, which I think is flawed, which is the sort of rating scale that we're still using. And I've done it myself, and I know why we do it. But there's a big first principles gap there to sort of look at, look right from that baseline, as I mentioned, steps and start from scratch again and reinvent what that needs to look like now. I think, we're in a different age than we were, 20 years ago, and we're still using the same methodology. So if we look at the sort of flywheel, it's defining it. Then it's, once you defined it, helping the founders and the leadership team to understand their role in that, which is role modeling. And that is conscious leadership then, which has to be practiced and it has to be reflected on often. And I mean conscious. It is an effort to make sure that you are, using those habits that people are recognizing and following suit on. But the founder plays such a key role in culture. In my opinion, they are the cultural custodian, not HR.
Yeah.
I mean, HR
100%.
too, of course, but yeah, fundamentally it's the founder.
It's
and then
why people join a startup is the founder. If from an employee perspective, it's the founder. They believe in what the founder is selling, right? Like, you're selling something and they believe in that. And I'd also like to add in, like, what I see a lot of times, founders are typically these people who see an issue and have a potential resolution. Okay, that's the business that they're growing, and they thrive in problem solving. And a lot of times they don't take a moment to do the recognition and celebration. And so as you're getting your leaders to be consciously thinking about, how do I role model what we're trying to execute here, the founder needs to be communicating and celebrating, recognizing when those leaders do it, so that other leaders can see this is what good looks like. And I think that's a lot of times what I see where the chain breaks, and that, we're not recognizing what good looks like. And so we're telling people, hey, good looks like this. And then we go on our day, and then we may never talk about it again, or we talk about it like 6 months later when we realize no movement has happened. And so it's like one of those things where you got to continue to talk about it, recognize it, and celebrate when someone is doing what you've asked them to do.
Yeah, I hear you. I think so to add to that, to break it down, I think that the thing that founders need to get right at the beginning is the company-wide definition of that before we get into the granular, how this translates into roles, because we kind of tend to do the opposite. We do like loads of role descriptions. We kind of describe like what we want to do at the granular level, but really the missing part is the fundamental company-wide thing on what high performance means, and the difference between what great looks like and what our lowest bar is in the business, so that we understand that we're not recruiting to lower that bar, we're actually raising the bar all the time. So that's a fundamental exercise that's not very well done. But to your point then around the role modeling part, this is where my empathy comes with founders, and this has come from my coaching experiences. There are certain personality types that are more common in my experience and well suited to the founder role. And if you look at an Enneagram, which is typically made of 8, arguably 9 personality types, there are 2 that founders more often than not fit into. And I also am one of those. I won't tell you which one, but one of them is the challenger personality. So the challenger personality is never happy with the status quo. They're always pushing for more, and you need that, right? And the other one is the enthusiast, the visionary, always looking outward and forward and leading from the front and so forth. Now, both extremely valuable and so important. But the dark side, or the trade-offs with those amazing personalities, is they may not be reflecting back, or the recognition piece, because when you are a challenger personality, you're never happy with anything. There's always more there's always more we can do. So there's an element of leadership being resilient enough to recognize that and build empathy for that, and don't need a pat on the back for every 2 minutes. But there's also then the trade-off when you're then coaching the founder to say, okay, there are key milestones in the business that we have to recognize at the company level. There are milestones that perhaps are more longer term for the leadership, and we must then spend that time to reflect and recognize and give feedback to the leadership team. And then we recognize that more early careers hires are going to be working more at the task level. And what we want to do in the early career level is to build confidence and little bits of risk taking that could lead to big rewards, and get them to understand what big bets and entrepreneurship is really about. So recognition is little and often more at the early careers level. And you kind of try and show them the system of company-wide all the way down to sort of frontline or early careers roles, whereby they have a better understanding then of what people need at different levels and across the company and a business.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're talking about high performance culture. A founder who may have 5 people may be going, okay, that's great, but I'm not ready for that. From our perspective as people operations, it is always good to start sooner rather than later. However, we do recognize that, there are things that you have to get in place to actually have a business where then you can actually double down and grow your headcount as you grow your revenue and so forth. So from your perspective and experience, what do you see as like the common thread of like, okay, now these CEOs, founders, they're coming at you and being like, hey, I got to really figure out how to get a high performance culture, a culture of like high productivity, smart people, raising the bar. When do you normally see that happen inside of a startup space?
Well, to your first point, I think the best founders, and I use the word the best founders, are more sensitive now to intentional design and are thinking about this earlier on than perhaps we've historically seen. So that's the first observation I see in with founders over the years. And the second one, to your point, when does this start happening? Well, again, we're chasing product market fit as a priority in the beginning. So it's all hands on deck and a bit all over the place. So I get that. I think, but having some idea of, stage fit and, values, even if they're not particularly codified, I think are very early and obvious from a founder if you ask the right questions. So we can interview for all of that quite quickly early on. But yes, the minute you, I think, have multiple teams that are required, start having, perhaps depending on the strength of the founder, you do have a project person in, or you have starting to all of a sudden build sales out, or you've got multiple different squads needed in engineering. For me, that's usually becomes a Series A pressing piece, because it's the transition of actually what is needed for scale, right? So it's culture is a lived experience and should be. It's driven by actions, not written down. But to scale that, I start saying that there is a need to codify what we are living, so that people can understand very quickly in terms of managing expectations when we talk to the wider universe to attract and for onboarding reasons and so forth. So there's an element of codification, there's an element of process and systems design that starts being needed. There's an element of training and onboarding being a real thing. So I always think of this a bit like a product. Like, you've got a lot of acquisition and activation happening very early on. You've got a lot of effort then to think about how we convert people to become early contributors to the business and have the earliest impact possible. And then you're looking for long-term sustainable growth on what that looks like in terms of retention strategy and growth and development. And they're the types of things that you start looking at. So activation and acquisition is always an earlier stage playbook, but the conversion and the systems and the all the things that go into that, usually post Series A, and then later A onwards, you're really thinking more about retention and growth, and realistically, as much as you let this as early as possible, thinking much more around ROI at that point in terms of cost per hire at the highest level over revenue and so forth.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think the other challenge I see founders have is as they start to expand, a lot of times they will put someone in from an individual contributor role into a manager role. And, a lot of times startups, they don't have the resources, financial time to execute on supporting that individual going into a managerial role for the first time. Now, maybe someone was a manager back in their life and they joined this company because they saw the vision and recognized that I have to be an IC first before I can get to that manager role. You might have those, but I find that those are rare. And so really, like, what I would encourage founders and CEOs out there that like really think about, just because someone is a fabulous IC, individual contributor player, doesn't mean it's going to equal a fabulous manager. It's a completely different skill set. And if you're not able and willing to be able to coach that person and give them resources to how to become a fabulous manager, you are going to see them struggle. And I see that a lot. And so talking about, managers and ultimately leaders, get into that place where you start to actually build, maybe you hire your first executive or your first like high level leader, and you start building that out. I think the challenge that I see is that a lot of times, because of what you can afford and what you need at the moment, that might be a director or VP level. But as you continue to grow, you're going to have to start thinking about upskilling that role. What have you seen in your experience, and especially since you do help founders with the hiring process of their leaders? What are some of the challenges that people see when they start doing this for the first time?
Yes, there's a few strategic questions I ask with when you're really getting down to like the a more sophisticated strategy would be, okay, so what's the business model and how complex is it fundamentally? If you've got a highly regulated business and a fintech or open banking or could be anything, right, legal or whatever, is that the place where we can have an average years of experience or an average age in the company at X, Y, and Z, right, in terms of years of experience and so forth, that dealing with, some of these markets and so forth? And how does the market work and what does it expect from us as a company? There's an element of having to match that in doing business. So, top line, we think about that and the model and what it's needed. If the model's less complex, it could like be B2C, where you can get a lot of data fast, A/B testing, sales cycles not as long or high risk and so forth. Then actually we may be looking at a different sort of persona, and we're able then to accommodate or take on talent that could be from a different demographic or a different sort of space. I think then also you have to look at the rate of growth and how then that can impact then how we look at the talent that we've got. So if you're really growing really, really fast, and then you have to introduce through your organizational design, more layers into the levels rather into the business, then you need to start thinking of your philosophy of like, okay, where does it come from internal promotions realistically versus outside talent that need to come in, and how do you start managing that messaging across the business and not promising everybody sort of management overnight and so forth because of the rate of the business needs to grow. It can mean in some businesses more than other that you do need to introduce, as you quite rightly mentioned, the head of or VP and externally rather quickly. That said, though, as a general rule in startups, the joy of attracting talent is because it does offer accelerated careers.
Absolutely.
So, part of that is it does allow for really high potential people that don't have to wait their turn in a big corporate and multiple years under their belt to excel. So there's a balance there. What I will say, though, and I agree that, and I look back on my own reflections, if, for my sins, I ever went back permanent again, then one of the things I would definitely be taking in my toolkit is the management training playbook and making sure that was like rule 101 done far earlier than I've done historically, because that is fundamental to success. And why is that such an important enabler? Well, because when you think of high performance, where does it actually happen? So the company level is very important for definition as a North Star, absolutely. But performance happens day to day between the manager and the employee. Doesn't happen with the CEO and the employee. The CEO is working on the business.
It's the frontline employees and managers.
Yeah. And if they're not equipped with the skills that they need, practical, and then what is the difference between the manager skill set and the leadership, inspiration, all those other qualities? They're two slightly different things, equally important though, skill set to have both. If you're only going to have one though, be a good leader, I would say. But you do need both of them for scalability and people to feel, that there's stability and comfort around some structure that you need as you grow. So I think that needs to be done at the micro culture level in the functional teams. So yes, to answer your question, I think management training is very important. And then the final point I would make on that subject is, do you want your top biller, as you quite rightly said, to all of a sudden stop billing and start managing? Quite often, and you see this in the tech space, your best engineer don't want to become a people manager. They like coding. Yeah. And those two tracks are important to introduce in your business so that you can allow for great individual contributors to specialize or, master or diversify certain knowledge and skills versus those that are stronger on the people side. And yes, you may still have what's called a player coach leadership definition early on, which means they're still relatively hands-on in the weeds and also part split on the team stuff, which is often the case early stage. But at some point then you have to take the founders on a journey that great leaders, as you scale, actually are less doing the hands-on work, and actually great leadership and management is a full-time job of its own. And then you are,
Absolutely.
and that takes a journey at a certain point of the company's growth, that those roles as purist roles in itself are very important to recognize that is a full-time role. So yeah, lots of moving parts as you grow and scale.
Absolutely. And I'd also love to add on, a leader doesn't necessarily mean they are a manager of people. You can have individual contributors who are really good leaders in your space. So don't put people in a box that they have to be managing people in order to be a leader. You can be a leader of the big practice you're in, and be that subject matter expert and help lead that practice without leading people.
Yeah, I agree. I think the phrase technical leadership can be used outside of technology in terms of being a good subject matter technical expert, versus being a team lead, which is more, I say that's more classified down to the people oriented, one-to-one personnel type character.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, I can't believe it. I feel like we could talk for hours. Any last tidbits or tricks or thoughts that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, I'm biased because I have a very strong depth, and I have a very strong depth in talent. But I do find when you look at the 5 whys, often, the big problem comes down to the who, not the what, and the hiring. So I do think that if there's anything you're going to invest in, is to learn to be a great recruiter and understand really deeply what you're looking for, and spend more time there. Because if you can get that bit right, what comes in is half the problem of what comes out in your company, and that is going to need great attention in this post-COVID world.
Absolutely. And to double down on that one more time, is you said for you to be a recruiter, and we're speaking here to our founders and CEOs, and I think a lot of them know they're also a recruiter, but a lot of our managers and leaders don't recognize that. So making sure that you bring your managers of people, who are leaders of people too, along the journey, and having them have the expectation that they're going to be a recruiter for their roles. It's not going to just be handed out to an agency or an internal recruiting team. It is crucial as a hiring manager, no matter where you are in your space, that you are a part of that and you are actually driving it. And a recruiter can go out and source as much as possible, but they're not going to have the same access to the network as a hiring manager who's in the space and may have some amazing people in their network. So it's important to have that partnership.
Yep, I agree. Nothing more to add on that front.
Well, Beth, this was such a fun conversation. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully those that have listened have pulled some cool tidbits from this conversation, and we'll go out and start executing and creating a high performance culture by starting with a definition first, and double downing on the type of people they're bringing into their org so that they can continue to level up the org and grow the business. So thanks, Beth, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a great weekend.